little confused there.
Okay. We will start in 3, 2, 1. The webinar has started.
Thank you, Naomi. Welcome everyone to the special implementation board meeting on the budget. We'll start this morning or this afternoon like we normally do, acknowledging that the theory of change, if we create a system that is to help homeless people, we should center them in that system, giving their voice and them the agency to speak for themselves and help develop the system. King County Regional Homelessness Authority mission statement is to make a significant dent in the and decrease the amount in the rate of homelessness in King County, first by centering customers, which are those people who are homeless, voices, and bringing them in to eliminate inequities in this system. Naomi, can you do a roll call for me?
Will do. Carrie Anderson. Nate Caminos.
Here.
Paula Carvalho.
Here.
John Chelmanak.
Here.
Juanita Spotted Elk. Gordon McHenry. Harold Odom.
Here.
Damian Patnall.
Here.
Adrian Quinn. Michael Ramos.
Here.
Sarah Rankin. Simha Reddy.
Here.
At this time, we do have quorum with 7 members present.
Thank you, Naomi. Just
Chair,
as
briefly apologize. I just would like the record to reflect that Adrian Quinn is excused due to reaching out in advance, and she is unfortunately ill today and unable to make it.
thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark, for bringing that to our attention and letting us know. This is a Zoom call. All things we say right in the chat are recorded and are down for public record. Excuse me?
Losses on our investments this year. We'll want to put a little bit.
Oh, someone's just muted, which is cool. We asked board members during this discussion, especially during the budget discussion, we probably have a lot of questions. All we ask is that you raise your hand so we can see who's first in the queue, and then we'll call on you. I'll now go into land acknowledgement. And this was a special session, so I didn't ask anybody to do any land acknowledgement. But if I talk about it, Nwishnamaya, Spotted Elk, Raven, Night Gun, a few names that I had problems with. I had to purposely go out and try to find how to enunciate and say those names, which I should. It should be like Smith rolling off my tongue, Johnson, or Odom, my last name, rolling off my tongue. But we do this, and I do it. We say, oh my goodness, that's such a hard name to pronounce. It's a name of people who live in our country. This country, this beautiful country that we have. Each spot along the way, there's a nightmare tale of indigenous people. We do no justice to that land acknowledgement if we only say we respect that we are on stolen land. It's more than that. Hunting, fishing rights are vanishing. Oil and mineral rights are being auctioned off. We talk about the school children, and now we have to find their graves and identify them. But don't stop there. Talk about the last 20 years on these places we called reservations, where indigenous people are graduating at a higher rate now, going to college, going to get their masters, their doctorates, and coming back to that place called the reservation and giving time so their youth can get that acknowledgement and see other people like them going forward in life. If we're to do a land acknowledgement, I call on each one of my board members to do something special, and I thank those who have done that already, to really go after what this country's about. As our history is being unfolded daily in front of us, things we didn't know, didn't learn in high school, we have to acknowledge that those people, indigenous people, Black people, brown people have been done harm. And we should acknowledge that with just more than a paragraph. That is my land acknowledgement for this special meeting of the Implementation Board. Simha?
Excuse me, chairs. Briefly want to acknowledge that Lamont Green has joined, I presume as an alternate.
Thank you, Mark, once again.
Right. Naomi, if we can make sure the minutes reflect that Lamont Green is here for Living Experience Coalition as an alternate.
Will do.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that thoughtful land acknowledgement. Welcome everyone, both Implementation Board members, staff, and to all our attendees. Today is a special meeting focused on the 2023 KCRHA budget proposal. We're going to, just as a reminder, this is not the final budget for the KCRHA for the fiscal year 2023. This is a plan, and we are going to make a decision as to whether or not to transmit this forward to the Governing Council as a proposed budget for the coming year. Before we do so, however, I would like to make sure that we have time for public comment. We're going to go ahead and open up public comment at this time. If you'd like to provide verbal comments, please type your name and the city you're calling from, if you so choose, into the chat, and we will keep that open for the next 10 minutes here. If you don't wish to speak out loud, please feel free to also use the chat to provide your written comment. Wonderful, we have one so far. George Scarola, Seattle.
George, you should be unmuted.
Thanks for joining us, George.
Great. My name is George Scarola, and I'm speaking on behalf of Lehigh. Lehigh supports the proposed 15 million increase to provider salaries. We can't thank CEO Dones enough for making this case so emphatically. We also support the 20 million increase to emergency housing, especially to purchase hotels and create new tiny house villages. It's time we recognize that our robust system of tiny house villages in King County already plays a critical role in transitioning people from the streets to permanent housing. Tiny house villages were started by people living unsheltered themselves. They have evolved from tents and porta potties in today's ADA accessible villages with hygiene trailers, laundry facilities, paved paths, and very sophisticated but still tiny houses. South End Village costs $20,000 per unit and a few months to build, compared to $350,000 in 4 to 5 years for a brick and mortar building. More importantly, tiny house villages are the most popular transition program for people living outside. For example, at Woodland Park, over the past few months, of the 89 people offered housing, 60 people accepted offers of tiny houses. We can and should interrogate the data, but here's what 2021 HMIS data showed. The vast majority of people at tiny house villages stay less than 6 months. The median length of stay is 114 days. The average cost per bed is $9,100 per unit per year. Lehigh's main mission is building permanent affordable housing. Tiny house villages offer a safe, dignified, and comfortable alternative for people waiting for housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful comments. Do we have anyone else from the public who would like to share their thoughts, either verbally or in written comment into the chat?
At this time, no hands are raised among the attendees.
Okay. Well, thank you, Naomi, for leading us through that. So let's get to the meat and potatoes of the session today. I'm going to turn it over to our RHA staff to take us. We had a time a couple weeks ago to go through the budget. In that interim period, I think both the budget committee, RHA staff, and others have had time to get feedback from the community. And if Mark, if you or another staff member would like to take us through the budget and how it sits today, that'd be appreciated.
Happy to do so. I'm going to run through an abridged version of the previous presentation that you saw and call out some advancements both in analytics that we've been able to do and also point towards some things that we got some feedback on that have shifted since the last time that you saw this. They are relatively minor changes at this time. I'd also like to ask Meg Barclay and Tiffany Brooks, our Chief Administrative Officer and Assistant Chief for Finance, to join me as I go through this. Now, let's see if I can get my screens to line up with what I'd like to share. Okay. Where is... Do you all see the full thing or the thing with notes? Too many screens. I just need to make sure we're showing the right thing.
The thing with notes.
The thing with notes. Okay.
Well, that's the slide sorter on the left side. The slide's not full screen.
The slide is not full screen. All right, let's try one more time. Now what do you have?
Same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not seeing the notes page. We're just not seeing the slides in full screen.
Okay. Well, let me...
You might need to share a different screen.
You
might need to share a different screen.
I tried swapping. This is...
Oh.
Go back to in-person meetings, y'all. I'm tired of this.
Mark, try, because I have to do this in about an hour and a half. I'm not quite sure. Why don't you open it full screen and then share that screen?
Okay.
Try that. And I think you should be able to advance using like the mouse click.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now what do you see? Yay.
Thank you for calling technical support.
Thank you, John.
There's a survey that Mark can complete at the end of this engagement.
All right, thank you all for bearing with me. This is a great time to note that we will be architecting our return to in-person meetings in compliance with the shift in the governor's order. All right, so what we are going to do today is just, again, briefly rehash what we talked through, and I will point to any changes that have happened since the last time that you saw this information. Starting with organizational updates, this would stand in for my normal CEO update to you all. We are at 64 folks hired in 13 months. That is up from the last time you saw this slide. As we continue to ramp towards our entire workforce, we have about 34 positions currently out, including around 30 system advocates. I will also note that we also have some folks who are moving on, one of whom I am extremely proud of, and we'll take this opportunity to note, is Naomi C., who is leaving at the end of this week to move to DC and work for Ways and Means. And we are delighted. Well, we're not delighted to see her go. That's wrong. I'm actually panicking about that, but we are delighted to see where she's headed and really excited to have been a part of her journey. As we continue to staff, I will continue to let you know how it's going. I think, again, my note on this is just, I never want to do this much hiring in my life ever again. All right, data. Again, rehashing, these are the population demographics. This is HMIS, not point in time count. Just want to continue to lift up the significant overrepresentation that folks experience, particularly Black and Native folks. A five-fold increase for Native folks above baseline in the county population, and a roughly 4.5 times increase for Black folks. Again, continuing to highlight the significant role that systemic racism plays in why people come to experience homelessness, and often what the course of that experience is. Moving into planning. So this is just to rehash, we are about to dive. I just finished working on a high-level work plan for our summer of activity that is going to drive to the completion of the 5-year plan in September. There will be a lot of engagement over the course of this summer, lots of opportunity for community members, providers, regional leadership to weigh in here. The purpose of the 5-year plan, I think it's always important to restate, is not to redo all the planning that has already been done. It is to convert that planning into an implementation document that can drive activity. So that'll be really what we're going to be focused on, getting to action and being able to measure that action. Regional Action Framework, which underlies a significant portion of that work, calls out that the authority is specifically responsible for the crisis response system, that crisis response work and the implementation of it, right, is going to sit here. We do play advocacy and partnership roles in other spaces, but want to note that that is not our primary role. I will also note for the record that I'm seeing 2 Lamont Greens signed in, which I think means one of those Lamont Greens is Daniel Smith, who I believe is a LAC alternate. And I want to lift that up for the record to reflect and for the chairs to note. Lamont or Daniel, am I correct in saying that?
Yes, I am here. I'm the alternate for Juanita Spotted Elk.
Fantastic. Thank you, Daniel, and welcome. On current system analysis, this is where there are more updates as we've continued to analyze our current portfolio. This is the conceptual model of our future system, and have already begun to get some really important feedback from the LEC and some other folks on how to refine this. Importantly, right, what we want to drive towards is a system that is conceptually aligned with the complexity of need that we see and can meet all those needs, right? The things that have changed since the last time that you saw this are really wanted to highlight, and thanks to our LEC partners for lifting these 2 things up. One, that folks need not pass through something. Folks do need access directly to housing when we are able to provide that. And that we want to make sure that it is understood that that is frankly not just a viable path, that is often our preferred path rather than having to transit other stations, so to speak. And noting that rapid rehousing itself is a suitable option to immediately house folks, including folks meeting the criteria for chronic homelessness until they can transition to either permanent supportive housing or other housing options. Again, as we continue to refine this model over the course of the summer with input from lots of folks, we expect to see additional tweaks and build out of data around the number of beds necessary in each of these types, and as well as the budget to fund the services, right, that is necessary for us to truly end homelessness. I think that, we should note in relationship to this, that this budget, and I want to affirm this largely for the public, I know the board has been in these conversations, but the FY23 budget proposal is not part of the reason why it is, not necessarily what the authority is calling a transformational budget, is that we want to make sure that the 5-year planning work is done, locked in, and that the budget that's attached to that is really what drives, the regional changes that we need to see. We also want to note, that as part of this work, it's really important to consistently elevate that, not just King County and Seattle can fund the change that we need to see, and that not even just all the local dollars in the county can fund the change we need to see. We will need to talk about how we're going to generate the full funding necessary in order to do the transformation that we know is necessary. Some of the numbers that folks will see will not be surprising. We've seen them in this community for many years, but we will need to have a conversation about where are those dollars actually going to come from. Again, continuing to refine our analysis of our current portfolio. What you'll see here is the shifts on this slide are just making clear the total number of beds in this portfolio type. It's about 4,400. We've also continued to do some analysis on how many people are served per bed per year based on what we can see in our system as we start to look at throughput and how to accelerate throughput so that folks are moving more rapidly into housing. And what you can see here is that emergency shelter beds serve on average around 2.5 folks per year. Obviously, the constraint here is largely in the system, in both, the number of beds that folks have access to, which, we would think we would deem insufficient, but more importantly, right, like beds should be able to serve more than that number of people. And that's where we need to, again, be having a housing conversation and be clear that housing is the solution to homelessness. And until we are really ramping activity in that part of the portfolio, we will continue to see these long wait times and low utilization numbers. Tiny house villages, we have about 482 beds total. Number of people served per bed is about 1.6. Again, that's the new data that you see on this slide. Oh, I apologize. There's one new figure that we've also broken out is the rate of return to homelessness based on what we can see. There's a typo on this slide. I apologize. The rate of return to homelessness in each portfolio section. So the rate of return from emergency shelter is roughly 14%. The rate of return from tiny house villages is lower at 10%. Again, for rapid rehousing, we see this slide is formatted a little wonky. Apologies again. We see that, there are about, we can't measure this one with regard to number of beds because it's a subsidy, right? But the rate of return is about 4%, quite low, which I think is important and is often counter to some of the narratives we hear in our community about how rapid rehousing performs writ large. Transitional housing, total number of beds is about 750. People served is about 1.8. Rate of return is 15%, one of the highest rates of return, although, relatively low when we think about what rates of return can be. Performance comparison, so just looking across the entire portfolio, I think what is the most important thing is just that we have about a 22% exit rate to permanent housing across these portfolio types. I'm sorry, I want to correct that. 22% across all RHA programming, which is beyond these portfolio types. So the exit rates to permanent housing are strong in our tiny home village portfolio, our transitional housing portfolio, our rapid rehousing portfolio, pretty weak in our emergency shelter portfolio. This total exit to permanent housing also includes hygiene, day centers, outreach navigation, prevention, and diversion. And some of those things we should note are simply, and Simhar raised this in our last meeting in terms of like, what metrics are the right metrics, right? It doesn't necessarily make sense as they are currently structured anyway to measure a day center's output to permanent housing. That's not what that program model is really designed to accomplish. And so certainly as we begin to reconstruct what the metrics are for the portfolio writ large, we will be looking at which things need to be measured for what program types and why. And that will certainly be part of the 5-year planning. Average length of stay in 2021 in days was 183. Average length of stay for folks who exited to permanent housing is 250. We broke that out because, again, pursuant to the conversation we had last time, we really wanted to begin to understand, is this the right thing? Is length of stay the right thing to measure? Is length of stay actually bad? Is, if people are stabilizing over lengths of stay and then able to actually exit to permanent housing successfully, how do we begin to understand this in a more qualitative and nuanced way? And how do we use this data to inform what we ask folks, particularly folks who are experiencing homelessness right now, to affirm, deny, tweak, modify, et cetera, as we go into the full system redesign. And then our overall rate of return to homelessness is 8%, which is, again, relatively low. Certainly, I think if we look at how folks are experiencing homelessness, what we can denote is that certain populations experience much higher rates of return. And we will want to analyze that both through a racial justice lens, a disability justice lens. We want to make sure that we're understanding who is affected and how they're affected. I will also pause briefly and acknowledge that board member McHenry has joined us and would ask that the record reflect. Okay, moving forward, we also have done some additional modeling on what emergency housing could be. That is in reflection to some requests that folks have had for, what are we talking about when we talk about this in relationship to other portfolios, and looking at how we would expect it to perform. And so what you see here is a graph that looks at cost. What we've done is model low acuity emergency housing, medium acuity emergency housing, and high acuity emergency housing. And we've stacked that against basic shelter. These shelters provide no services, are congregate in model, and have essentially been phased out in their entirety. Enhanced shelter, hotels, as they have existed currently, shelter surge hotels, which were very limited COVID-specific program, and it is necessary that we break them out cost-wise because they were very different in how they came to be, very different in their funding source. Again, tiny house villages are broken out, and transitional housing. And what you can see is that the projected cost range on emergency housing runs essentially from mid-range and enhanced shelter through not even quite the highest in the enhanced shelter category. So this is one of the reasons why the authority remains, pretty interested in pursuing this as a model. We think that some of the rapid acquisition dollars can be used to drive the stand-up of some models like this potentially, but broadly, right? Like, I think what you all are hearing from this team, and what the community is hearing from this team, is a desire to make everything more like housing, so that, right, like, as we think about how people are coming inside, that they're not going through various gating things that are less like housing before they can hit something that is like housing, right? And this is one of the things that I really want to credit some of our lived experience colleagues for raising really potently in our conversation with them. And Daniel or Lamont, if you want to speak to that. But one of the things that I heard in that conversation that I want to lift up was just pointing to the fact that in those gating mechanisms, there is often continued destabilization, right? They sometimes are not actually places where people do, heal and, prepare to move on with, the rest of their lives. Those places actually can become destabilizing. And that sometimes the power dynamics in some of those spaces are not healthy, right? That, like, there are power dynamics that, like, strip people sometimes of their self-determination to decide, like, where am I going next and why? And so one of the things that we want to make clear, again, reflecting that conversation with our lived experience colleagues, is that, for any future system, we do need to ensure that choice and dignity are the bedrock of it, right? And that's poorly articulated in visual, representations of cost and, facility type, et cetera. But we do need to make sure that we are saying that really clearly and really loudly in these conversations, because if we don't say it and don't repeat it and don't make it clear that that's what we're after, we run the risk of recreating the same paternalistic structures, but inside different physical architecture. And we do not want to walk down that road. I'll just pause and Daniel or Lamont, is there anything that you would add from that conversation? All right, hearing nothing, I will proceed. What we also did in this space, lost my cursor, there it is project what we would anticipate around exit rates, cost per exit, average length of stay, and rate of return. And we did this looking at comparable models, both within the system and other administrative data sources. And so basically what we're projecting is that emergency housing could clock in at a roughly 90% exit rate to permanent housing with an average length of stay of around 203 days, with a rate of return of roughly 5% to homelessness. This is, again, based on our administrative data and projection. I think what we would be interested in seeing, obviously, as a program type like this actually was brought to scale, is how does that, again, have variance with regard to population? How does that have variance with regard to level of service attached, et cetera? But we did want to be clear that, the proposal that we're bringing forward around, some of this work is absolutely not, just an idea of emergency housing without some expectations about what we would want to see in how that portfolio works. And certainly what we would be, looking to tweak if we started to see things outside of what we anticipated once providers started to get these things up and running. The last thing I'll note before I switch into the proper budget is just I will continue to lift up that our wages are not sustainable. So this is from our, again, administrative data. And what we can see is that the King County median household income is about, this is in hourly, is about $49 per hour. Wage needed to afford a one-bedroom apartment is about $42 an hour. Wage considered low income, $39 per hour. And where we clock in based on administrative data for case managers is $24.92 per hour. And for direct service workers, those are folks who we consider to be our frontline staff. We are looking at about $19.70 per hour. Again, I will just say this is utterly unsustainable. As a provider said to me in a meeting recently, talking about this budget when we were soliciting feedback, they said, listen, we need to be honest about the fact that it is impossible to do new stuff when we cannot actually sustain the old stuff because the staffing is not there, right? And so as a result, I will also say that everything the authority has put forward is modeled on living wages inside whatever that funded piece is, right? So were this budget proposal to be funded, the pieces that are modeled are set at living wages for everyone who we would contract out with. However, right, we recognize that the whole system needs a correction in order for pay equity to be achieved, and not just people who come to work at programs that are designed, sort of post, FY22. All right, I will swing into the 2022 approved budget, and I'm gonna move a little quick just so that we can get to discussion. There's not a whole lot new here, as it is the budget we approved already and are operating on. But we'll note that 7% of the budget is operating, 23% was new program funding, 118 million was our program base. And we'll note that the continuum of care at about $52 million, we currently administer about 11. And King County continues to administer about 71% of the portfolio, or $37 million. We anticipate those contracts transitioning to the authority over the remainder of this year, and we'll keep you updated if for whatever reason that timeline shifts. All right, so the incremental changes that we have proposed essentially are derived from three buckets. So gaps in services in terms of how the current system is structured, ongoing effects of COVID-19, and operations funding for the authority. What that breaks out to is a set of priority incremental changes at $68.2 million, $5 million for safe parking, $15 million for daytime community space, $20 million for emergency housing, $20 million for high acuity shelter, $1 million for severe weather emergency response. This has increased that from $750K. That increase is reflective of feedback that we got in community, in particular from some providers and the Lived Experience Coalition, who felt that the county-wide response to severe weather has historically not been well coordinated enough and lifted up a desire to really see some robust planning and really clear capacity creation for the providers and coalitions that are asked to do that work, in a boosted way during any severe weather event. We also have $7.2 million in increased RHA operating funding. And then what we see is additional, changes for consideration: $15.4 million in provider wages, $1.5 million for valuing lived expertise, $500,000 for BIPOC agency participation, and $795,000 for technical assistance for small providers. We had a lot of really good conversation about the last three items with the Lived Experience Coalition, and should those things be awarded through our funding process over the next, 8 months. I'm doing math. No, not 8, 5 months. We're really excited to have a conversation about how those things can be implemented in line with some strong anti-racist principles, and real clarity around what kind of capacity we want to see in the system. I'll move quickly through these next slides. There hasn't really been a significant change here. This is really about safe parking. We're looking at 6 to 7 sites, about 20 vehicles per site, serving roughly 195 annually. Really trying to drive better service for folks who are living in vehicles and fewer folks suffering significant fatality rates living in those vehicles, particularly, frankly, during severe weather incidents, where again, we're not connecting, we're not providing folks with what they need. Daytime community space, up to 12 new sites or enhancement to existing sites, serving around 1,400 folks a year, looking at natural connection to services, safe alternatives to being outside during the day, and also really focused on thinking about, this was also from provider feedback, thinking about how these spaces can help people identify where they might go that night, if that is something that they're trying to explore. Emergency housing, we just talked about, this could, depending on model, go up to about 350 new beds. High acuity shelter, this is about 55 beds. We're looking at on-site medical and behavioral health, more successful support for folks who have those significant needs, medical or behavioral health. Important thing to denote about this model versus some existing things in our community, and this came up during some of that community conversation, is that the presumption here is that there is a slightly longer length of stay than some of the existing things that we have in order to best support people's transition into housing. The severe weather, again, looking to support that countywide response, and additional operating. So we are looking to online more folks, particularly in our community impact, that's our data division, our administrative division, which is Meg's team, and our system performance division, which is Peter's team. Really looking at the ability to wrap our arms fully around our current bodies of work, and support them countywide. We, as you all know, but for the public, when we took over the system, we consolidated over 300 contracts down into around 220. and that like we are understaffed for that work, just to be very clear. Like the management of 220 contracts is still quite a bit of work. The invoicing on those contracts, the performance monitoring, the data that we need to manage in order to do good performance monitoring. We are small but mighty right now, and really want to make sure that as we continue to online, that we're able to support our provider partners and really get them the assistance that they need rapidly when they need it. Total priority changes are 68.2 million against the base budget that is about 208.2 in total. And then if we go to additional incremental changes, this is a new slide, but it basically just walks through those things. So we've got the provider wage consideration, the lived experience consideration, BIPOC agency participation, and technical assistance for small providers. And what you see here is just a description and expected benefit. We've talked through this before. This slide is really for the benefit of the public so that, as people go back and peruse this deck, they're able to see some of the authority thinking. These additional changes total at 18.2 million. And so if we segue into the entire, proposed budget submittal, then we get to a total proposed at 227.4 million. And if we just do a little bit of breaking that out just in a different way so folks can see it. This is the base funding up top, priority incremental changes, and then additional incremental changes. Again, when we talk about the addition of staff, right, we are already managing 219 projects, and this would add potentially roughly 28. And so we really want to make sure that we're able to wrap our arms around that work should it come our way. Proposed operating, right, breaks down across the team. Really just looking at, again, significantly need to significantly boost work in the program and performance, system performance, community impact, and admin space. Ombuds is still under design. We're looking at receiving a charter that you all will have an opportunity to review and deliberate from Qatar Jordan sometime in the next couple of weeks. And I know that there are some hires that are going to be part of finalizing that work. Basically it. This is just a slide that looks at comparison funding, looking at base budget, one-time funding. We have a small grant from the Rakes Foundation that is funding some work, and then our operating base budget. And again, just looking at the 22 and the 2023 comparison there. And I believe that takes us to an opportunity for discussion. The recommended action here is to authorize the RHA to submit the budget proposal for City of Seattle and King County consideration. I will stop sharing and I will just take this opportunity to remind again, both the board and the public that this is the action under contemplation is the authorization of the submission of a proposal. This is not the final authority budget. The final authority budget is subject both to the ratifying at the governing committee level and ultimately the appropriate contemplation and adoption by Executive Constantine, Mayor Harrell, and the respective King County Council, respective councils of King County and the City of Seattle. So this does not bind them to anything. This is not even frankly necessarily, and just to be very straightforward, this isn't even necessarily what we should expect to see come back to us. This budget will be taken up and looked at in relationship to all of the funding priorities that the city and the county have. This is normal agency or departmental practice to put our hopes, our dreams, what we think would be good on the table, and then to work with policymakers and legislators to identify what is realistic and available in relationship to revenue.
Mark, thank you for that overview and review of changes. why don't we take this time to have a discussion about this? Do we have questions or comments from the other implementation board members? C. Gordon Sand.
Thank you, Chair Simha and Mark. Appreciate the orientation overview. In the past, we've severe weather. In the past, we've heard about the lack of severe weather facilities, buildings, and also the need for staff, providers to provide support when those severe weather facilities are operational. The 1 million that's in this proposed budget, is that limited to just services and operations, or does this budget contemplate some capital utilization to build out more shelters?
That's a really great question. This does not contemplate capital to build out more shelters. What we have found through the incidents and in conversation with providers is two things. One, the vast majority of our unhoused neighbors are not using the severe weather shelters because it doesn't actually make sense. They are not constructed in a way that you're going to be able to store your stuff. Many of them have no parking. So there are things. So if you are somewhere and you need to pack up all your things and move to a severe weather space that is only a nighttime shelter, and then you're gonna have to take all that stuff back out. So what we found over the course of the incidents that we've managed thus far and in conversation is that it does make more sense to consistently ramp two things. One, our ability to provide harm reduction supports, and that's through the work of our outreach teams, our lived experience coalition colleagues, and our provider network generally. That's how we were able to keep a lot of people out of harm's way over the course of the winter with the two significant severe weather incidents that we found. And the other thing that we have identified is that it is, if additional space becomes necessary, the best way to do that is to work with providers to rent space or provide them with the quick capacity to expand into unused space at their facilities by providing dollars for additional beds and more food and more water, that kind of stuff, right? So those strategies seem to be faster, more in line with best emergency management practice, and allow us to focus capital construction on housing and long-term shelter options.
Thank you. Appreciate that clarification.
Oh, sorry. Oh, John. I see that you have your hand raised. If you want to go ahead.
So my intent is to vote to pass this along to both the city of Seattle and to King County. I do want to comment on a couple of things. This is a little different than a typical agency budget, because the typical agency budget would go to someone like the county executive or the mayor, and they'd go, "Oh, come on. Your hopes and dreams are way too big. You got to trim it down." And this is a different process because it will actually go to them without them having done that review. It's also going without a lot of backup material. And I think that is really important, Mark, that time is spent by staff to put together good reasoned staff reports about why these programs are necessary, why the changes are necessary, and certainly why any increase in funding is necessary. And I think strategically you might take a look and see, what are the ones that will have the most impact over the next 1 to 2 years, and make those your priorities. We're not going to get all of this, right? I think that's a reasonable, but going in and doing an all or nothing typically will end up getting you pretty close to nothing rather than pretty close to all. And I did want to say something else that I have noticed I've noticed that there have been statements that, well, this is the policy of the authority. A couple of different things. One of those was on congregate facilities. One of those was on sweeps. And I would have to go back and read the founding documents here. But someone has to set policy, and that would either be the implementation board or the governing board. And so I don't know whether the governing board has adopted those as policies, but as we continue to move forward, I think we have to have a policy adoption strategy. Take a look back at the founding documents and figure out who it is who has to take a vote. I may have some differing opinions on some of these. Others may have differing opinions, but we should at least have that discussion and vote. And maybe I just missed it, but again, very good work on putting together a budget request. I just want us to be realistic going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I see Harold has his hand, and then after that, Nate. Harold, you can go ahead.
And if you're talking, you're on mute.
No, I was looking for that unmute button. I'm sorry. So a couple of things. I do believe we do need a policy, but I think, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, that's you being the CEO for the authority, for the operating authority, that is your policy, that you don't believe sweeps are in a humane or done a humane way. Are you talk for yourself? I think that was your operating decision, but not maybe the policy of the whole body of the whole, let's say. But so tiny house villages, you know, I stay in one, and I've been in one for almost 4 years now. At 6 months, I should have been into housing, stable housing. We lost our case manager. This is not typically me. This is a lot of people. We have people who are just warehouse there. I couldn't stand that. I had to get out and work, had to go out and do something that was more productive than being there just waiting for people to come help me. But more than half the camp is there for years. I don't see where these numbers come from if that's all of a sudden they've tried to do something different. We do have some luxuries now. We have a trailer with 3 showers, 3 porta potties, 3 potties that get clogged almost every day. Showers, no hot water. On one takes hot water, shower, the rest are cold water. It's hard to see what numbers reflect when people are talking about people. Go to these camps and visit them. There's a drug trade outside my front gate that's been there for the last 2 years, and it's done by one person inside of our thing. And all I hear is, can't do anything about it. It takes down the morale. People are just upset about it, and it affects how we act with each other. Numbers don't tell you that. Go visit the camps. It's not only Georgetown, it's other ones. I hear it from, and I've seen it at other ones. You have to go visit the camps. Numbers cannot tell you the people. We have to get rid of this stop and then go, stop and then go. I wonder how much money transitional housing actually generates instead of wraparound housing, wraparound services in rapid rehousing. Ms. Lee has written on paper that she is against rapid rehousing. We have to look at the people who it affects and not the numbers. I don't know how many times I hear that. Oh, we're doing better here, better there. But in reality, you just put in paved parking in Georgetown. It's been there for 4 years. I mean, paved walkways where we had 2 people hurt themselves, fall over, one's just crippling, hopping around now. Yeah, and you just put in paved walkway. It's been gravel. Porta potties are there until 3 weeks ago. And 2 are back because of the fiasco with the trailer. But that happens at all of them. Don't let the numbers fool you by how it's being managed. People who talk to people in a very worse way seem to come to these tiny house villages. I mean, I get right up in their face because I will not be talked to them. I'm a human being and you have to treat me with the respect. Just because we're homeless does not mean we're the scourge of this nation. No, we're human beings. We have families. We have hopes and dreams. And, you know, I'll not be belittled. And I think Miss Lee needs to come out and look at all of these places because she hasn't been, I haven't seen her in Georgetown in at least 2 years. And she's promised us 1.5 case managers. We just got that with the 2 ladies who are there now. They've only been there in the last like 4 months. We've had that. Other times we've been 6 months without case management. A forward movement is not happening. I respect George Scarola with the utmost respect. He's there, he's doing thing work, but you know, it doesn't tell the whole story. You know, a single story, like the danger of the single story, you have to realize it's not in the numbers when you're talking about human beings who are suffering. You know, that onward movement, we have to move on into housing. We have to. We can't be stuck somewhere for years. You know, transitional housing, it's transitional. Should be maybe a couple of months, 6 months at the most. We need to get into housing. That's a housing first model. And it works and it's evidence-based. Get people into housing, they do tremendously better. Have them in a wait station, they're just waiting for the next, and then nothing happens, they're just waiting. So I don't believe in the tiny house village model. You know, it's just like the sweeps, I don't believe in those. We have to take firm stances. And I might be the only person here who believes that, but I'm living it. And I wish people would come visit those places instead of read about them. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Harold. I want to make sure that Nate, I saw that you had your hand up if you'd like to go.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Co-chair ready. I just wanted to go back to process, but before I get into that, I just wanted to reiterate my appreciation to Mark, Meg, and Tiffany on staff and under Damien's leadership as our treasurer too, and somehow with alongside you as our budget committee has been meeting every week or more, I think in the last month or so, alongside staff in this process to get us to this point. But Mark, you kind of reiterated to the close of your PowerPoint presentation, and John was referencing it too in terms of the agency, but just wanted to kind of center for ourselves, but also for the viewing public in regards to our process and timeline today and moving forward. It's my understanding with today's special meeting as an implementation board, we are being asked, as you mentioned, to essentially be consider and hopefully propose and pass this proposed budget, which will then go on to the city of Seattle and King County. However, if folks aren't aware, we also have our partners on the governing committee are also having a special meeting this Friday at 10 a.m. That some of us will be joining the staff. As written by the ILA, the implementation board is required to present the proposed budget to the governing committee, which, John, I would just say, you know, while it's unusual in terms of the agency preparedness in terms of this budget being shared to not shared directly with the county exec and the city mayor, we do have the county exec and city mayor actually as governing committee members of the authority. And so they'll be there on Friday as well, assuming so. And I believe staff has been doing some engagement and offering briefings about the budget development to both members in addition to their staff and their offices during this process as well. So, but Mark and others just want to make sure that that's the understanding of the process and timeline. And if there's anything more, because it's been a couple weeks since you've laid out what that timeline looks like for us, that you wanted to fill in there in terms of the gaps that I've laid out to clarify for us would be helpful.
Thanks, Dean. No, I don't believe there's much to clarify. You know, I think the framing that's just important is, and I think, you know, to some degree, I think this is it's hard, but it's good. Like what the public is about to see is what, you know, public agencies often have like all kinds of meetings about, like, you know, that no one sees, right? Over the course of many months. And so, you know, I agree with John that like, this is absolutely like, you know, here is our proposal. We were not in revenue forecasting conversation. So I like, my team and I put this together absent that information. I think certainly, right, if we were in some of those conversations, it may have shifted what we put forward, may not have, I don't know. But the conversation from here forward will be how this proposal hits that reality and then what's possible. And I absolutely agree with John that at that point, we will begin to say, okay, how do we prioritize and in relationship to what? Like, I don't know of any agency in the history of government that has gotten everything they have put forward. And so, I just want to be really clear with the public. That is not the expectation of this team, right? Like we start with where we think we need to go, and then we're going to start to build more and more off the back of the 5-year plan. And, we'll have conversations about how to get the dollars we need. Again, would remind folks, as I said at the outset, there is no reality in which just King County and Seattle can fund the solution here, right? And that like part of our going to regionalism as the model was so that we could have broader conversations about funding with all of our communities and the state and the federal government, right? We always knew that was the kind of funding cliff we were up against.
Thanks, Mark. If I can share, have gotten feedback, in talking with others in the community, governing council, and also hearing this discussion today, John and yourself. I think it makes, right now our prioritizations are sort of in 2 buckets, right? Like 2 large buckets. And I think I worry that will make it tricky for when the time comes, Seattle and King County to choose, right? Like how much of this are we going to fund? The other thing I want to point to is something you'd said earlier, which was that how are we going to do new programs when we can't fill the positions that we have, right? Like right now, that salary bump, right? Like the inflation adjustment, the workforce stabilization piece, that $15 million is sort of in that second category. So I'm wondering your thoughts on sort of, what do you think the right prioritization list is here? Like, can it be broken down further than it is now? Should that be higher? I'm sort of curious, both your opinion, Mark, and the rest of the board.
I will say, and then I defer obviously to the board, I will say that like, I believe that based on the internal conversations that our team has had in preparation for what we assumed we would be asked, we do have some preliminary tiering of like, where do we think the, priorities are if we're pushed to further, subdivide and, would be happy to have that conversation if the board would find that helpful.
I think I would certainly. Others, that'd be all right if we had Mark share kind of that potential prioritization. Okay. I see a thumbs up from Gordon. You want to go ahead, Mark?
Sure. And Meg, kick me under the table and or jump in if I misrepresent what our thinking has been. So I think in we've done this sort of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And what we are thinking as tier 1 is the safe parking, the provider pay, and the lived expertise grant. Those things we feel we really don't want to lose if at all possible, right? I think that, what you just said, Simha, has been pretty consistent in our thinking around just the total inability to make new stuff come online if we cannot hold the old stuff from a staffing perspective. And the provider pay that we have proposed is very much in the space of treading water. It is not actually the total correction, and we discussed this with the budget committee at length. The total correction necessary is north of $69 million into the $70 million range if everyone in the system was going to make a living wage. This is really about locking in against inflation and making sure we don't actually go backwards on provider pay, right? And so we really feel like there is no system without the people. And so we have to prioritize that. On safe parking, I think our team feels that there is just nothing for this population, and we do not want to lose the little bit of ground we're about to make with the RFP that we put out this year. We want to continue to build our work there. And then, our values are our values. And so our work around folks with lived expertise is very, it is system critical to us. And to not have that inside our tier 1 consideration felt inappropriate. Our tier 2 considerations are high acuity shelter, KCRHA operating, and severe weather. Those things, again, we have talked at length about the lack of spaces for folks who are chronically unsheltered and have significant medical or behavioral health needs. Where can they stabilize as they transition to housing? And we know that the fatality rates for that population, I say this frequently, but if I'm remembering my citations correctly, the mortality rate for someone who's unhoused and schizophrenic is 35, right? Younger than I am. And we really need to make sure that is not the reality that we are inside of. Again, looking at our operating budget, we just need to be more, we need to have more capacity to respond, right? I believe you all saw, some of the conversation this past week, and we certainly were in conversation with all of you around the work around our contracts. That work went as well as it could, given everything else that was happening. Let me just be very clear on that. There is no reality where Peter and his team could have done something differently. And frankly, I applaud them every day for the work that they put in, because it has been against all odds, essentially. And what we know is that moving forward, Peter, as he says to me every day, is undergunned in order to accomplish the work that the system calls on him to do. And so that operating funding is really essential in order to get the work done. The severe weather work, again, this is about keeping people alive in times of severe crisis, and we really want to honor the need to live into that. And then our tier 3 work, based on our internal analysis, is emergency housing, BIPOC participation grant, and TA for small providers. Again, I think in that space, these are brand new things for the system in a lot of ways. And obviously, I think our team, and as you'll all see as the 5-year plan coalesces, and reflects, what the regional action framework calls for in terms of right sizing options for people. Our team believes that these are like emergency housing and, building more pathways for folks who are in community and doing that work with the overrepresented populations. We very much think that is, part of the path forward. But, in relationship to some of the conversation we've had today, I think if we had to choose, that is part of the path forward, and certainly can be stepped into as part of scaling and right-sizing the system as we move into FY24 in relationship to the 5-year plan, and talk about the totality of the transformation that we need to undertake.
Mark, thanks for that. Really appreciate it. And that is a little bit of a shift, right, from the budget, the proposal we were planning to. That would be a shift in the budget proposal that we're sending forward. Changing the 3-tiered prioritization and pushing workforce stabilization a little higher. I'm curious as to the rest of the panel board's thoughts on that, but I see Michael actually has his hand raised. So Michael, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you. I applaud this budget, and I think it is credible, it's human-centered, and it's not ideological. Just want to present a slight bit of context. I'm on the Affordable Housing Committee as well for King County. And path is to create 44,000 units by 2024. We're nowhere near there. Now, that's not to, say anything about the Affordable Housing Committee. Actually is a credible group. It's a good group, and it's gotten organized very well and with measurable outcomes. Yet it still operates on a theoretical basis of commitments that may occur in the future. By providing the baseline for work that will move forward, data-driven and measurable over time, this positions us to push up on the critical matter of affordable housing, the lack thereof, especially at 30% and below of median income. And so this budget is absolutely critical to be able to push upward, to be able to say that the housing supply needs to be regenerated and new decisions and risks need to be taken to be able to meet the demand that is already evident.
Ordering of stuff, I guess, and I'm not suggesting I know the right ordering, but it's just reacting.
So just
like,
to say that I would say we're in a good position, I think, to support Mark and staff in proposing. If other, city of Seattle, King County dispose differently, fine. But I think we should propose forthrightly and boldly. Thank you.
Co-Chair Reddy, if possible, I'd like to put forward a motion for the board to consider and have additional discussion on. Good.
Motion's on the floor. Do I have a second?
I'll just formally say it. I move that we authorize the RHA to submit the 2023 budget proposal as presented to the city of Seattle and King County for consideration.
This is Paula. I second.
Yeah. All right. We have a motion on the floor. Is there any interest in asking for reprioritization to be as part of that submission, or would you like to keep it as is?
My motion is to keep it as is. And just to speak to my motion, first off, I want to start where Nate began as well. Just sincere thanks to Mark, Meg, and Tiffany for their work and transparency as we've met over the last several weeks. And I know that that's difficult. Everybody's schedules are tight. And so I really appreciate everyone making time for that. And I would also want to acknowledge that Mark did prioritize initially as well. And so you notice actually in the document, it speaks to the priority incremental changes and then the additional incremental changes. And so I recommend that we keep it there. If there's additional questions or things where the folks would like further prioritization, then we could have that conversation moving forward. And Mark definitely was not speaking off the cuff, but obviously that there could be some additional thoughts and changes as the process moves along. And so I appreciate Mark being willing to put that forward right now, but I would not recommend that we change the recommendations that were presented to us this afternoon.
All right. Well, we have a motion and a second to approve this budget proposal for transmission to the Governing Council for subsequent transmission to the City of Seattle and King County. Let's take a vote.
Any other discussion, Chair, I believe.
Oh, sorry. Any other discussion? Yes. My apologies, Nate.
I would just add, unless there's anything else, that I am supportive of the motion as presented, in addition to Damien's comments of what he just presented in regards to the prioritization. Simpa too, I think you and Harold as co-chairs, and possibly you and Damien as budget committee members, but also as our treasurer and co-chair, we can think of some way on behalf of the implementation board to put that in writing in some manner to governing committee members in advance of Friday's meeting when we come to them on to lay out, as Mark had stated, the initial prioritization and getting into the details of additional layers of prioritization and all of that can happen in Friday or even beyond Friday and between the agency itself and each of those two governments. But I just really appreciate the budget committee engagement and also the comments from our fellow board members in this process.
Thank you, Nate.
And I would say, We're happy to support you in the drafting of that and whatever else you need in prep for the meeting on Friday.
Thank you, Mark. Any other discussion? All right.
Gordon here, but I see Harold's hand is up, so I defer to him first.
May have been from earlier that was left that Harold, if you're still there.
Yeah. I think Nate might be right. I think the hand was up a little bit earlier. Gordon, if you want to go.
Yeah, I'm very supportive and plan to vote in favor of the motion. I just wanted to echo, and I really appreciate Michael Ramos's comments about upward pressure and opportunity for more affordable housing. I love that we're looking at our work on a regional basis as designed. And I also think we are dealing with systems within systems, and really appreciate his expectation, a goal perhaps, and maybe a challenge to other folks in power to approve what we have in front of us, and in doing so also do their work to have more affordable housing throughout the region, especially 30% and below. So just wanted to add my commentary to, I think, Michael Ramos's wisdom.
You know, speaking to part of Mark's presentation earlier, where we talked about the role of the RHA, right? One of our roles is to advocate around affordable housing. I think making sure that this budget is set in that context, you know, in our letter might make sense. All right. Just double checking. Harold, do you still have a comment or question? If you're speaking, you're still on mute. Other comments or questions on this budget? All right. As we have both a motion and a second, I suggest we proceed to voting. Yemi, would you please do a roll call vote?
Will do. Mary Anderson. Nate Caminos.
Yes.
Paula Carvalho.
Yes.
John Chamanek.
Yes.
Lamont Green.
Yes, on behalf of Sarah Rankin.
Gordon McHenry.
Yes.
Harold Odom. We'll circle back to Harold. Damian Patnaugh.
Yes.
Adrian Quinn. Michael Ramos.
Yes.
Simha Reddy.
Yes.
Juanita Spotted Elk.
Yes, Daniel Smith in behalf of Juanita Spotted Elk.
Harold Odom.
I wonder if he's having technical difficulties. Mark, could you text him real quick? Thank you.
I did. I'm not sure. I texted him and asked him if he was still connected. Haven't gotten a response yet.
Okay. We'll just give him another moment here.
He said that he lost cellular coverage and he's trying to get back into the meeting.
Okay.
Daniel, could you ask him for what his vote is?
I don't know that we can accept it that way. I'm not sure though. Naomi, any thoughts on that?
we cannot, my understanding is that we cannot formally accept it. We can note it. And that in a subsequent meeting, we can correct the record for what his vote was, but we cannot accept it relayed that way. We can just make a note that he has communicated.
I do have Harold on the phone. Harold, can you speak your voice vote for the budget?
Aye.
That sounded like an aye to me. All right. Well, congratulations, everybody. We have passed our 2023 KCRHA budget proposal for transmission to the Governing Council, which will happen on Friday by unanimous vote. Thank you, everybody. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So Gordon here, so moved.
And I'll take that as a second as well from Damien. All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Sorry, you do have to vote on that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You can do
All those in favor of adjourning?
vote. Yeah, you can do a voice vote.
All right. All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
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 All those opposed?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't make that assumption that people are doing.
All right. We are adjourned.
Well done.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody.